Hello. My name is Em, and I'll be your MC. Get it? Good afternoon, and welcome to this special gathering where we come together to celebrate the rich and fascinating history of Washington Island. Whether you are a longtime resident or someone just recently discovering the island's charm, we are thrilled to have you here today. Washington Island is more than just a place on the map. It is a community with deep roots. From its early days as a home for the Potawatomi people to its settlement by Icelandic and Scandinavian immigrants, Washington Island has been shaped by diverse cultures and resilient people. Today, we honor that legacy. The history of Washington Island is one of perseverance, adaptation, and community spirit, a spirit that continues to thrive here today. So sit back, relax, and prepare to embark on a journey through time as we uncover the stories that have made Washington Island what it is today. Thank you for being here to share in the celebration of our island's past. Let's begin. The kindergarten, first and second grade students took a field trip to visit 4 early island homes. Then, while looking back at pictures from the archives of the same homes from a long time ago, they drew their own drawings of them. Today, in the slideshow, you will see the students' interpretations of the early island homes while they sing the Fisherman's Song with Julian Hagen.
Oh, 14, thank you, yes. I'm in Green Bay playing on the 21. My tour. Yeah. You guys ready? Yeah. Okay, I'm so proud of you guys. Thank you for singing with me. Sing with you. So cool. I'm so proud of them. Okay, here we go. Sing out. Anytime. Southerly, will it do what we need done? Moving ice flow from here to St. Martin's. I'll owe my catch to the wind. Thank God as I pull my nets in. If it blows us free, let's just sail again. Come on, gang. Now there's good times and bad. I can't hear you. Get through it. Reaches. Life goes up and down like the waves we sail. Good job. There's a way of life, and it's in the blood. The passage that leads us to the lake. 4 hours to the nets is what it takes. So drink the coffee strong and black. Spend time thinking back to a day of old and another catch. Here we go. Come on. Now there's good times and bad. Hold on, hold on, hold on. We'll get through with the love averages. Life goes up and down like the waves we sail upon. It's a way of life, and it's in the blood. Are we going to call him in now? Here we go. Come, little white fish, glimmer, glimmer, into my nest now. Swimmer, swimmer, sing with us, people. Help us carry it on. Come, little white fish, glimmer, glimmer, into my nest now. Swimmer, swimmer, sing with us, people. Good job. Sing the fisherman's song. That was great, you guys. Evening with the compass set for land. Venus warm as the heart, but cold still are the hands. Full-bellied seagulls as happy friends. Jackson Harbor is straight ahead. Fish tug welcome welcome home. Now there's good times and bad. Hold on, here we go. We'll get through with the long marriages. Life goes up and down like the waves we sail upon. Good job. It's a way of life, and it's in the blood. Let's get them swimming in. Come, little white fish, glimmer, glimmer.
Into my nest now, swimmer, swimmer.
Sing it with us, people. Yeah, help us carry it out. Come, little white fish, glimmer, glimmer. Into my nest now, swimmer, swimmer.
Sing it with us, people.
Sing the fisherman's song. Good job, you guys. Woo-hoo! Great job, you guys. Take a bow. Take a bow. Come on. Yeah. Okay, we have to get off now, I think, right? Did they come off? I don't know what happened. Yep, you guys have to come off. Oh.
The third and fourth graders will be presenting information from the very formation of Rock and Washington Islands, through the time when only Native Americans lived on the islands and were visited by French explorers, and up to the time when early white settlers started making Washington Island a permanent place to call home.
We live in the town of Washington, in the state of Dole County, in the state of Wisconsin. I live at 1589 Foss Road, Washington Island, Wisconsin, 54246.
Here's a map of the town of Washington. Well, we know as Washington Island. And this map also shows Rock Island that is only 5.7 miles from Washington Island. As we look back at Washington Island history today, it is important for us to know that Rock Island led the way for Washington Island and actually all of their county in fishing, social development, community, and government. So we begin today with the history of Rock Island. I live at 797 East Side Road, Washington Island, Wisconsin, 54246.
Washington and Rock Island are part of a long rock formation with high cliffs called the Niagara Escarpment. If you can imagine it, a long time ago, all the land used to be as high as these cliffs. Over millions of years, the wind and water wore the land away and left these big, beautiful cliffs called the Niagara Escarpment.
This map shows that the Niagara Escarpment, which is the red part on this map. It is located all around the 3 of the 5 Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, and Lake Ontario. The other 2 Great Lakes are Lake Superior and Lake Erie.
Scientists believe that these weather-resistant limestone rocks were formed during the Silurian time period, 440 million to 420 million years ago, when the ocean salt water covered Washington Island and Rock Island.
This is the world today. This is North America, the United States, and Lake Michigan, and you know, of course, Washington Island and Rock Island. This is the equator, which divides the world into the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Northern and southern. Look how far we live from the equator today.
On the world today, this is North America and the United States. The equator is below us. But this is the world during the Silurian time period, 419 million years ago. Here's North America, and you know, of course, the United States, Lake Michigan and Rock Island, Washington Island, that haven't formed yet. This is the equator. The United States was once below the equator and covered with salty ocean water 440 million years ago. So that's why shells and fragments from ocean animals are in the rocks that make up the Niagara Escarpment. On our Rock Island trip last year, we found fossils of animals from the Silurian time that had broken off of big cliffs of rock and landed on the beach. On Washington Island.
This is what the Silurian Sea looked like 440 million years ago.
These are sketches of fossils we might find on Washington and Rock Island. Gastropods, trilobites, and brachiopods. Rugus coral and cephalopods.
As the climate changed, it cooled, and giant 1 mile thick sheets of ice called glaciers formed and moved through most of Wisconsin. This is Washington Island. And this part of Wisconsin wasn't even affected by glaciers. The Green Bay lobe was connected to Washington Island. The glaciers grinded, grooved, smoothed, and cut through the solid rock, and chunks of ice were falling off their edges. This is how the deep hole of Lake Michigan was formed. Then,
as the glaciers began melting, their water filled the large basins that the glaciers carved out. They became the Great Lakes. Oops. They are the largest natural freshwater reservoirs on Earth.
with weathering, parts of the limestone cliffs, like the ones on Boyer's Bluff, have eroded into the lakes, and the rounded white beach stones were formed by the tumbling action of the waves, washing them back and forth on the shore.
Schoolhouse beach rats! So don't take them!
When the glaciers melted and trees and plants started growing, the animals moved northwards like to Washington Island and Rock Island, following the plants to eat. Then, so did the people. The Native Americans not only followed the plants to eat, but the animals to hunt.
Hey, one tribe of Native Americans on Rock Island were the Potawatomi. The Rock Island Lighthouse was named after them. Oh, let us tell you about the other Native Americans that came. Winnebago, Winnebago, Winnebago. Ottawa, Chippewa. Sakbarabadi. Huron, Fox. Potawatomi. Winnebago, Winnebago, Winnebago. Ottawa, Chippewa. Sakbarabadi. Huron, Fox. Potawatomi. Winnebago, Winnebago, Winnebago. By 1600 AD, the Ottawa, Chippewa. Sakbarabadi. Huron, Fox. Potawatomi. Lived in Door County. Deer fur trading with Frenchie. Winnebago, Winnebago, Winnebago. By 1600 AD, the Ottawa, Chippewa. Sakbarabadi. Huron, Fox. Potawatomi. Lived in Door County. Deer fur trading with Frenchie. Winnebago, Winnebago, Winnebago. By 1600 AD, the Ottawa, Chippewa. Sakbarabadi. Huron, Fox. Potawatomi. Lived in Door County. Beer fur trading with Frenchie. Winnebago, Winnebago. That's a wrap. Yeah, we saw Native American artifacts from Washington Island at the Jacobson Museum last year.
Yeah, she's right.
We saw arrowheads, a stone from a hatchet, maps, moccasins, and stone tools.
And Jeannie Hutchins and Nina Herbst told us all about them. Then they told us about my great-great-great-great-grandpa Jens Jacobson, who built the Jacobson Museum to collect artifacts that he found on his land by Little Lake.
Hey, who's my great-great-great-great-grandpa too?
For 200 years, the Native Americans traded beaver fur with the Frenchie. French people that sailed down the St. Lawrence River. Throughout the Great Lakes, past Washington Island and Rock Island. And down the Mississippi River.
Yeah, she's right. In 1634 and 1635, it was probably some of these Native Americans who met me, G. Nicolay, the first European explorer to discover Lake Michigan and stop by the island I named Potawatomi, which now we know, of course, as Rock Island.
In 1673, I, Father Jacques Marquette, and my French explorer friend, Louis Joliet, left St. Ignace, which is where Lake Huron connects with Lake Michigan. I traveled 2,500 miles for 5 months along the northern shore of Lake Michigan, stopping by Washington and Rock Island, and then on through the northern part of the Mississippi River.
I know who you are. I know who you are. You're Rene Robert Cavalier, Sierra de la Salle.
Yeah, she's right.
I, Rene Robert Cavalier, Sierra de la Salle, traveled all the way down the Mississippi River and claiming the whole valley for France. Earlier in my travels, my men who were taking furs back to Montreal are believed to have drowned in a shipwreck offshore of Rock Island. What happened to our ship, the Griffin, in 1679 remains a mystery, but some believe it was the first sailing vessel in the Great Lakes to sink.
It was the French voyagers experiencing violent seas in the passage between Rock Island and the peninsula, Washington Island and the peninsula, that named the passage Ports de Mort, which translates as Door of the Dead.
The French may have gotten the name from the Potawatomi and Winnebago, who lost their tribe members trying to cross the passage in canoe. The Potawatomi called the waters Door of Death.
Today we call this Death's Door, and this is where the name Door County originated.
Almost all through the entire 1700, ship traffic through the Rock Island Passage of French explorers continued until after the French and Indian War in 1763.
And Washington and Rock Island may have been a good place for the Huron Indians to hide during the French and Indian War. This is a map before the French and Indian War. All of this land was once owned by the French. This is a map after the French and Indian War. As you can see, the British won the war and then owned the Great Lakes region and the fur trade until after the Revolutionary War, when the New World, as it was called in the earlier centuries, became the United States of America.
As word of beautiful wilderness and waters in Wisconsin spread, non-Native Americans settled there.
By 1824, the fur trade has ended because so many non-Native American people settled there. And as the whitefish and trout began to come into the area, fishing became more and more popular as a way of life. Early in 1831, the Menominee Indians surrendered a huge area of land to the United States government, which included present Door County and all the islands on Green Bay, so that the United States Senate could explore the region.
Then, in 1833, the Treaty of Chicago required the Potawatomi
To leave the last of their Wisconsin lands and move west to a new reservation in the Kansas territories.
With trade growing between Green Bay and the eastern cities of the Great Lakes in the early 1830s, ship traffic through the Port de Mort Passage increased, which really increased the need for a lighthouse, marking the way through the Rock Island Passage.
Lit in 1836 for the first time, the lighthouse brought one of the first non-Native Americans to live on the island, David Corbin, the first lighthouse keeper to Rock Island.
In September of 1836, there was only one white couple reported to be living on Rock Island, besides David Corbin and his friend. But it wasn't long after that fishing brought others.
And those first white settlers were not quite alone. They shared the woods and beaches.
With about 50 wigwams of Chippewas who continued their people's ancient custom of fishing with spear or hook and line, and as the whitefish and trout for at least 15 years, Native Americans quietly shared Rock Island with whites who were outnumbered by Indians.
These were Rock Island's earliest pioneers.
They made their living packing up barrels of salt fish and selling them to the government, supply boats or schooners that were passing by.
But besides clean air, sparkling water, and beautiful forests, the pioneers of these first 5 years lived no easy life. Work was endless, and sickness and physical danger were constant threats.
One man living on Rock Island took barrels of fish on his ship to market in Green Bay and Chicago, returning with mail, newspapers, and other important things for a living, like barrels of flour, salt, pork, dried fruit, crackers, sugar, and even coffee and tea. This gave the people living on Rock Island a connection with the rest of the world.
Until 1840, Washington Island lay pretty much dormant to white settlers. In 1844, a man named Amos Saunders sold the government lot he bought on Rock Island and built a fishery on Washington Harbor.
In 1848, Wisconsin became a state.
And in the same year, Rock Island's population was growing. People were married and babies were born.
In 1850, Henrietta and John Boone from Rock Island had a baby girl, and Martha Lee and Henry Miner had a baby boy named Jesse Lee Miner. He was the first non-Native American boy born on Washington Island.
Jesse Miner is the reason most of the early history of Rock Island is known today. It is written in a manuscript titled Jesse Miner, His History of the Island of Potawatomi.
Also, in 1850, the town of Washington's local government was started at Henry Miner's house on Rock Island.
The new town included 3 islands: Washington Island, Rock Island, and Detroit Island.
Amos Saunders was the first chairman of the town of Washington.
Henry Miner was the clerk of the town.
And John Boone, Justice of Peace. One of the first acts of the new town board was to establish a log schoolhouse on the beach at the south end of Washington Harbor, the beach we now call Schoolhouse Beach.
In 1853, scarlet fever took the lives of 3 people on Rock Island, including 2 little girls. Over the years since 1836, people came and left Rock Island for different reasons. Some may have just left for fear of getting scarlet fever, but any way of looking at it, by 1853, Rock Island's earliest pioneers were fading away.
Even the township of Washington's government had moved to Washington Harbor as Washington Island was being more settled.
Then, in 1852, Henry Miner had moved his family to Washington Island too.
In 1862, the Civil War had just begun, and the then new Door County Advocate reported that the islands had over 20 enlists, including Henry Miner.
In 1866, John Boone, one of the last of Rock Island's earliest pioneers, fell sick and died. And by 1870, in the Door County Register of Deeds, it is recorded that there were no new people settling on Rock Island.
As Washington Harbor on Washington Island grew into a fishing village with an ice house, a post office, a log schoolhouse, and a steam mill for sawing lumber, Rock Island's use was fading into unimportance.
But it is important for us to remember that Rock Island led the way for Washington Island and all of Door County.
In fishing,
Social development,
Community
And government.
So we began with the history of Rock Island, and now the middle and high school will continue with pieces of history from Washington Island.
The topic Andy, Karen, Kari Gordon, and I were given was the Scandinavian immigrants and their influence on Washington Island. We had 12 fifth and sixth graders and 2.5 school days. On the first day, each student was assigned a topic. The morning was spent learning about the archives and then using it to research. And we are so thankful for Steve Reese. He spent days and hours. The afternoon was spent interviewing someone local who is knowledgeable about their topic. The second day in the morning, Donna Benson taught us an hour of rose mauling. Kari Gordon worked with us on a new Scandinavian dance, and we went to the cemetery to do rubbings of a gravestone, either of the person that the student had or a family member. In the afternoon, we wrote a summary, which you are going to hear now, of all we had done and learned our second day. But on the third day, we all jumped in the van and visited each place that was connected to the person or the place that we had studied, and then they shared what they had learned with each other. What an enriching and fun 2.5 days. It was really, really wonderful. I think that you will be as amazed as I was about how embedded the Scandinavian culture is in so much of island life. I'll just hand each one of them so you can point.
Okay. The Scandinavian flags. The Danish flag was made in 1219. It was based on a battle. The red symbolizes the battlefield, and the white symbolizes the holy cause for which the battle is being fought for. The Swedish flag was made in the 16th century, and the main colors are yellow and blue. These are the traditional colors of Sweden, and the colors stem from a shield, and the shield is showed having 3 yellow crowns and a blue background. The Norwegian flag was made in 1821, and the colors consist of blue, white, and red. The colors represent liberty and independence. The flag of Finland's colors are white and blue, and was made in 1918. The white in the flag represents represents the snow covering the country, and the blue represents the lakes. Finland's nickname is the land of 1,000 lakes. The Icelandic flag was made in 1944. It is blue, red, and white, and these colors represent fire, ice, and water. All the flags have a cross on it, which represents Christianity. After I researched these flags, we went to the ferry docks, and we got to see all the flags up on the flying in the sky or whatever.
Thordur Guðmundsson, a famous Icelander. Thordur Guðmundsson was a doctor from Iceland who moved to Washington Island in 1885 to help sick people. His brother Arnie convinced him to come and live with him. When he moved to Washington Island, a lot of people from different islands in Door County needed his help. His brother Arnie would row him across the water in a rowboat, since there wasn't many nice boats back then. There were a lot of people who got sick, so he had to treat them at his house. He would have them sit down on a table because he didn't have the nicest area. He only charged $10 because everybody wasn't rich. They had money, but not very much. A lot of illnesses were going around, which made it hard on him. Some of the time, people paid him in oats instead of cash. The oats were for a pony he named Topsy. Once, a Norwegian captain brought him a horse and a 2-wheeled cart from Milwaukee. So for the rest of his life, he rode the 2-wheeled cart. Over the first 12 years, there were 224 births and 63 deaths, which isn't that much when you compare that there was 700 people or more living on the island at that time. It was a hard life on the island because he was the only doctor. And with the amount of people on the island, I bet if he was still alive, he would say he was going to go crazy. He died suddenly on January 29th, 1899, at the age of 51. People say that he died because there was a bottle on the table and he poured it into a cup thinking it was beer, but it was gasoline. His grave was one of the 2 grave monuments that was made and paid by the town.
Ole Hagen, a famous Norwegian. Ole Hagen is a famous Norwegian and was born in Norway near Oslo on December 15, 1851. When he was 18 years old, he became a subject in the military service. He didn't want to go to war, so his family immigrated to the USA in 1881. The family was named Hester Hagen, but it was shortened to Hagen when he came to America. Ole and his family landed in New York at Garden Castle and eventually made it to Chicago. Ole married Fanny Paulson in Norway in 1880, and in 1881 they sailed to America. They ended up coming to Washington Island where they had relatives. In 1882, they were able to buy a little house and barn for only $400 on West Harbor Road. All their water was carried by an oxen team from West Harbor. They took summer's boarders in up to 23, so their sons had to sleep in the barn. Fanny made ice cream and Ole made Christmas bread. He went from house to house selling it during Christmas. He was fiercely developed to America, but he was never able to master English. Ole loved to play baseball and even 3 of his sons played for the island team. He and his wife Fanny celebrated their golden wedding in 1930. Ole sold his farm to his son Henry. Today, this house is owned and lived in by Henry's great-great-grandson, Julian Hagen. The farm granary was moved to the main road and became the Log Cabin Restaurant, now the police station. Henry and the oldest children were Jack and Margie Virginia and Joy. My great-grandma Joy ran the restaurant at the time. My grandma helped me do some research at the archives. My grandma Jeannie helped me with some research at the archives. I went to the cemetery to find his grave. I'm also wearing his wooden shoes.
Bo Anderson, a famous Swede. November 4th, 1865, Bo Anderson was born in Gothenburg, Sweden. The family moved to Washington Island in 1883 when Bo was only 18. On the island, Bo's father bought 33 acres of land in Detroit Harbor from Knut Schelswick. Bo's father had died tragically when Bo was only 25, so to support his family, he became postmaster of the Detroit Harbor Post Office, where he remained for 15 years. Bo had also married Ida Washburn. Bo was asked to build an inn for visitors. So he and Ida built the first tourist hotel, the Ida Bo Inn. It was a great inn, but it had burnt down and was rebuilt and called the Holiday Inn. Bo and Ida had boat races and harbor cruises. There was a long dock where people from Green Bay could land. And over the years, they had added several cottages with a boathouse, bakery, and cheese factory. Bo was also town chairman, had owned a lumber company, and helped Ida start the Detroit Harbor Methodist Church. He also put gravel on the main road, which would be the first gravel road. He was responsible for the island's first telephone system. Bo and Ida had no children, for the children had died at birth. And in 1914, Ida had died. And in 1923, Bo had died from a diabetic coma when he was only 57. I would personally think that Bo Anderson was a very important person because he cared about people and always saw another thing that he could build or two. We visited the Holiday Inn, and it was cool to see that the inn was still there. We also saw Donna Benson's rose mawing on the doors.
Jens Jacobson, a famous Dane. Jens Jacobsen was born at Landsgard, which was an island part of the islands of Uls in Denmark, in 1867. At the age of 14, he and his parents moved to the U.S. because his father did not want to be forced to join the Prussian army. He arrived at the steamboat dock in West Harbor. It was pouring rain, and they had to walk a trail to the home of Mrs. Larson, who was his mom's sister. Jens was trilingual in Danish, German, and English. He attended the school at Washington Harbor. When he became a U.S. citizen, he had to walk in snowshoes to Sturgeon Bay to receive his papers saying that he was a U.S. citizen. When Jens got older, he started to work at the lumber mill at West Harbor. He would pack the shingles that they made there and help place them on the roofs of clients. Jens wrote multiple stories and poems about Native Americans. Later in life, he became the chairman of the town of Washington. Jens married Olive Garrett, and they had 4 children together. Sadly, Olive died in 1909 while their kids were still very young, and Jens had to raise them mostly by himself. Jens started the Jacobsen Museum in 1936, where he would collect artifacts and fossils and then place them on display in his museum to show to the public. A document that was written by Jens states that the town shall have a museum committee known as the Jacobsen Museum Committee. The purpose of such museum committee shall be as to gather, locate, record, and permanently preserve a collection of natural, historical artifacts of the region. In 1952, at the age of 85, Jens Jacobsen sadly died. Even though Jens Jacobsen died, his museum is still preserved and you can visit it today. My sources are multiple items from the archives and an interview with Jens Jacobsen's granddaughter, Mary Jurgensen, who I am distantly related to. She didn't really remember much of Jens Jacobsen, but she remembered that there was a wishing well that used to be near the museum, but it was sadly taken down.
Mrs. Gertrude Anderson, a famous Icelander. Mrs. Anderson was the first child of Icelandic immigrants on Washington Island in 1874 in a small wood cabin on Detroit Harbor. The winter of the year that she was sick, she lived in the Icelandic castle. She loved reading, knitting, and when she was 15, she was already taking care of her whole family by cooking bread, churning butter, and knitting clothes for her family and to sell because her mother was ill. Mrs. Gertrude Anderson had 5 children: Olivia, Louise, Sylvia, Martin, and Hannes, and a husband named Martin. Mrs. Anderson was a clerk, otherwise known as a secretary at what is now known as the Washington Island School, for 19 years. She lived on Main Road her whole life. She just moved across the street when she got married. From all the information I learned, I think she was hardworking. Hardworking and tough. I got my information from the archives and quite a few books.
The Icelandic Castle. Otto Magnusson, at the age of 21, arrived on Washington Island in 1874. He had a vision for building a safe location for other newly arriving Icelanders and equipping them with needed skills as they fled first from Iceland and later Milwaukee. The Icelandic Castle wasn't ever a castle. It was only a 2-story building with about 6 windows. Many called it the Free Hotel or Motel. The Icelandic Castle was made in 1876. It had 6 bedrooms. Athebold means all be welcome, and this sign was hung above the door inside of the Icelandic Castle. The Magnusson family owned the land for 15 years. The entire family helped make the building. The Icelandic Castle could house 4 Icelandic families at once, and some of the skills they taught there was, learning a basic English, learning trade, and learning the practices of the Americans. Gertrude and Anderson also lived at the Icelandic castle. Near the Icelandic castle, Icelanders started farming. The reason why it was called the Icelandic castle is because there weren't many houses with 2 stories. The building began to collapse around in 1940. I made a one stake or sign that we hammered into the ground where we thought the Icelandic castle collapsed. I got all my information from the archives.
The coffee pot. One day, Martha Stelter, a Girl Scout leader, was flipping through a Lions Club magazine. She found an ad for a little trailer. She wanted to buy it because she could use it to sell baked goods to make money for her Girl Scout troop. So she bought it, and Irvin Gunlickson and Thorwald Johnson fixed it up to look like a coffee pot because Scandinavians always said that coffee is the best of all earthly drinks. It was finished in 1941. Martha Stelter also rose-mulled it, a.k.a. she Norwegian painted it. They sold sweets and baked goods from it. It was placed at the ferry dock, but then went to where the Albatross is now. Then it moved again, but this time it went to the baseball diamond. But then they thought the best place it could go was the ferry dock. When Martha Stelter died, the pot's usefulness went with her. Eventually, the town decided that the coffee pot should be used to give information to any tourists with questions about Washington Island. Many young women worked in the coffee pot. Today, the coffee pot is still right by the island's Welcome Center. I enjoyed going to the archives and learning more about the coffee pot. I used to go to the Welcome Center with a friend. I saw a lot but did not know what it was, so I'm very happy that I can tell her about the coffee pot. I want to thank Donna Benson for teaching me and my classmates how to rose mull and explaining about Scandinavian folk art. My sources were the Washington Island Archives, the Washington Island Observer, and Miss Nielsen.
Scandinavian recipes. Scandinavia brought the island smorgasbords and fish boils. The women of Trinity Church had the first smorgasbord in 1948 and continued to 1975. Today, Bethel Builders have the smorgasbord on fest weekends. The Legions, Lions, and Kenny Coin do fish boils. In Norway, fish boils are a cheap meal for a large family. This is my cookbook I made for this project. I added the main foods that'll be on a smorgasbord: laspa, pickled herring, Swedish meatballs. My mom makes the best Swedish meatballs, Danish kringle, and sweet soup. Other important recipes I added was how to prepare a fish boil. You need 12 small red potatoes skinned on and scrubbed well, 8 cups of water, 2 cups salt, and 4 whitefish heads. Tails removed, gutted, but skin on. Cut into 2-inch pieces. Melted butter and lemon wedges. The instructions are: boil water, add potatoes and salt, and cook until done. Add fish and cook until firm. At an outdoor boil, kerosene will be thrown into the fire and fish oils will boil over. Do not attempt this at home. Lift potatoes from the water and drain. Serve right away with melted butter and lemon. Thank you, Glenna Reeve and my mom, for helping us with this part of the project.
The
Scandinavian Fest. The first fest was in the summer of 1948. Mary Richter, Gladys Moschka, and a group of girls wanted to do a Scandinavian Fest. The first Scandinavian dance teacher was Connie Sutter at only the age of 15. The first dances happened at the Lutheran church outside. Then the fest occurred at the Red Barn less than 10 years later. In 1982, the fest moved to the street between the gym and school. The first couple of shows were just girls. Then women started to do it for a while. Then boys came in, then men. The number of dances started at only 24, but now it's over 160 dances. The first dances were generally done in couples, except for a few solo dances. They included turning dances, as well as sit dances for groups of couples. Popular traditional Scandinavian dances are the polka, Skottsjö, the Rhinelander, and the mazurka, all common to Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. I'm dressed in one of the bundas people wear at the fest. I just started dancing this year, and I've learned how fun it is to enjoy people and dance the choreography.
Icelandic horses. In 1965, Mr. Paul Rutledge, Arnie Richter, Jack Myers, Lloyd Lehman, Jim Kohlers, Ray Hansen, Melody Ellefson, and Henry Clinthans all became owners of the Icelandic horses when 8 mares were brought to Washington Island. Freya was one of the 8 mares. It was cool that she had my name. Icelandic horses are well-tempered horses. They are actually the purest type of horses. Icelandic horses have 2 other gaits, the tolt/canter and the flying pace. They are technically horses even though most people think they are ponies. They can jump over 6 feet high and live to 30 to 35 years. Normally people start training them when they're about 4. Arnie Richter's mare went to his granddaughter Evie Purington. She named her Icelandic horse by Lear. She wrote a book about swimming, going for ice cream at the Elbe, and trotting around the island with him. In an interview, Lori Vanessa explained that eventually she bought 5 of the 8 mares and started breeding her own. She opened a stable for trail rides, which is still there today, but not open. She still owns some, and we got to meet one named Dragon. Marisa Karen helped Lori care for the horses when she was younger, and in return got free riding lessons. Marisa told me that the Icelandics only breed the horses for their good looks and not normally their color or looks. Or good temperament, not normally color or looks. She also said that Icelandic horses really like the cold and dig in the snow to get dry grass. In Iceland, there were no flies, so they had to get used to flies on the island. Thank you, Marisa Karen and Lori Vanessa. I think Icelandic horses are really cool, and I would like to have one someday. I really enjoyed learning about them.
Stavkirk. The Stavkirk was made because it would help preserve the island's Nordic heritage and background. It's supposed to look like the churches in Norway that were bigger and more circular. Stavkirks are wooden churches that originated in roughly 1000 AD, about the time when Christianity was introduced by King Haakon the Good. Skilled woodworkers built an estimated amount of 1,000 stavkirks in Norway. The stavkirk is used for meditation and to have services. The altar was made by Gary Hendrickson, and the dragons were made by David Ranney. Dick Purington helped carve the 12 St. Andrew crosses. The stavkirk took 3 years to build, and then in 1999, the bell tower and dragons were added. John Hirschberger was one of the main carpenters. Dale Bjergensen, Emmett Woods, and David Ranney were some of the people who helped. Dale Bjergensen passed away on April 3, 1995, 4 months before the Stavkirk was completed. In his honor, John left Dale's tool belt in place on the rafter screw, where he hung it between work sessions. It still hangs there today. Mr. Ranney met me and my mom at the Stavkirk. He explained that the dragons originated from the story of the Sigurd saga. There was a king and he had 2 sons. One son was so evil he killed his father and stole the money his father had. His brother went after him and the bad son turned into a dragon. Then they fought. So what this story symbolizes that the dragon can be both evil and a source of protection. Thank you, Mr. Ranney. My favorite part of the 2 days was when we went to see the Icelandic horses.
Thank you. Wasn't that wonderful? And yeah, I think so. Yeah. Several of them, their ancestors started, like the kids are, it was the original people who came that are their family trees. And next, they're going to do their family trees, right? Thank you. It was great. You can take a bow.
The 9th and 10th grade students focused on historical and cultural landmarks on the island. Photos were taken, dates and changing ownerships noted, and the usage of certain buildings over the years was researched. Older photos were found primarily at the archives, and many islanders were interviewed for additional information.
Fiddler's Green. Ted Gudmundsson and his wife Sigrid bought the store in 1921. The store was really just a moved building, the original Detroit Harbor Schoolhouse. They added rooms and remodeled the building so that the store could hold more products and quarter people. An interesting fact I learned while researching was that Ted owned a Harley motorcycle with a sidecar for short stop deliveries. And the store had many other owners, but is now owned by Kate Kniff, who turned it into Fiddler's Green.
The Island Dairy. Hans Peter Andreasen started the Island Dairy in 1868. Little is known other than the dairy made butter, and no cheese was made at the dairy until 1928. There were many different owners. The dairy got passed to Andrew Justinger in 1948. On May 5th, 1949, the dairy burnt down. The whole island came together to find Justinger work. Jenny Lounders offered her barn and an old machine shed, and Justinger accepted the offer. Just 4 days after the fire, he was back in business. In 1960, the Washington Island Cooperative Dairy was formed, and it was run from 1960 till 1968. After that, there were a couple different owners of the Island Dairy, but it's now the EMS building. The Red Barn Park. The Red Barn Park started as a storage building for John Gisselin. The next owner was Arnold Klingenberg, who offered the property to a drama group who had performed in one of his buildings. They accepted this offer. In 1946, the Washington Island Community Center Association was formed. The association donated land and buildings, the Red Barn and the Ice House, with the request that it be kept as a place for island people to enjoy. In 1985, the association signed the deed to the Red Barn over to the town, and in 1988, the association was dissolved. However, the Red Barn has always been and continues to serve as a center of entertainment for the island.
Island schools. Washington Harbor School was made in 1850, and today it is Dalton Nature Center. Detroit Harbor School was made in 1876, but it was torn down because of asbestos and structural concerns. The photo of the bell here is in front of our current school, and it was the bell of the Detroit Harbor School. The Lucky School, or known as the East Side School, was made in 1890. Today it is unoccupied and is private property. Jackson Harbor School was made in 1891, and today it is known as Seavers. The coin store. We don't know the date of the photo here, but coin store was in front of Schoolhouse Beach. Today it is known as St. Michael's Chapel.
So these are the old potato farm. On the left, we have an aerial view of the potato farm, now Marion Vilas Patel's. This photo was taken August 14th, 1987, back when all of the land there were fields. On the left, we have Jim Hansen with Ed Anderson's twin boys, G and John. The date of this photo is not known, but they seem to be toddlers in this picture. On the right, we have one of the potato harvests. The top left, we have the potato harvest of October 1965. And on the bottom left, we have harvesting and loading potatoes into trailers. Whatever. The Mackinac Island, Mackinac City, before the bridge was built, they had ferry boats. These were purchased and converted into boats to carry potatoes from the island around the Lake Michigan area. And one of them could carry up to 2,200 sacks of potatoes, which is several tons of potatoes. And they were all loaded at one time each season. These are the fishing tugs. The CNR is at the top left. It is owned by Jeff McDonald, although it doesn't see much use anymore. On the top right is the Alex C. I don't know who owns it, but it is currently decommissioned and not in service and put on display at the Jackson Harbor dock. The bottom left is the Sea Diver, owned by Kenny Coyen, and he uses it for fishing for his restaurant, KK Fisk. At the bottom right is the Welcome. It was built in 1926 and has seen several owners, some normal fishermen. At one time, the ferry line owned it as its mail ferry. It went from Northport and back to the island, the same path that our current ferries take, for the exclusive purpose of mail. Then it was owned by the potato farms for carrying potatoes for a brief moment as well. Today it is owned by Kenny Coyen. It is decommissioned and not used, but it is put on display at Jackson Harbor for everyone to see.
Bethel Church. I don't know if close enough. Okay. Reverend Kitwood was the founder of Bethel, which was built in 1865. It was and still is one of the historical churches in Door County. In fall of 1961, the building of the church's annex was starting. In July 8th of 62, it was completed. The church still stands watching over the island today.
Gibson's West Harbor Resort. Gibson's was built as a lumber camp in the late 1870s because of fires like the Peshtigo Fire, and in 1947, Mr. Gibson's parents brought him and his two older sisters to the island and purchased what is now Gibson's Resort for $12,000. Herb graduated and was in the service until 1969. Eventually, he bought the resort from his parents in 1970. Something Mr. Gibson told us he feels is unique is the stories told in the register, where people write notes about their visit. He also mentioned that the West Harbor Resort is like a step back in time. It's slower paced. Swimming, fishing, and doing things you can enjoy while relaxing is definitely a business attraction. There was a big fire in 2011. It was just after a big Halloween party. Mr. Gibson says healthy living outweighed the tragedy and, of course, the help of island friends. Overall, Mr. Gibson told us family makes life positive.
The Jacobson Cabins. Jens Jacobson came to the island when he was 14. He personally made all of the cabins which still stand today. The roofs are built vertically, so melted snow or rain would fall off the sides. That also prevents molding. These cabins are filled with different objects like wooden boats that he made himself, arrowheads, beads, saws, and many other things are located at the Jacobson Cabins.
Sunset Resort. Sunset Resort has been welcoming customers for 115 years. It all began when Torger left his native country, Norway, in 1880 at the age of 20 years old. After a year of being in Chicago, he united with his fiancée, Anna, and they had 5 kids together. Eventually, after the U.S. went through a severe depression, Torger lost his home. With little to no options left, Torger bought land on the island even though he had never seen it before. In 1902, Torger and Anna welcomed their first few guests. They called it the Pine Beach Retreat. The retreat thrived for 25 more years while their kids grew up and built families. After the passing of Torger and Anna, their youngest son, Bill, and his wife, Dora, inherited the property and moved back in 1938. They immediately started making improvements. It was a cheerful time for Bill and Dora. After they passed away, 2 of their daughters, Maxine and Lois, became business partners. And now the 4th, 5th, and 6th generations of Angelsons work together to carry on the traditions of Torger and Anna and still show the same hospitality they have for over 100 years.
Finley's Holiday Inn. The Holiday Inn was built in 1898. Before, the property was a fisherman's lodge. It was used to bring freight to the island. The Stellers owned it in 1970 and added on suites. The Holiday Inn later had a fire in 1989. The Finleys bought and rebuilt the inn that same year. The inn was known for weddings and has had a wedding every weekend once. It is now owned by Dan Jorgensen.
The Potato Dock. The Potato Dock was constructed by Ed Anderson in the mid-1950s. It was made out of a ton of stone and 2 wood boxes. In the 1950s, they used 2 car ferries to store and process the potatoes. They would wash and bag the potatoes on the boat. It was sold to the Washington Island Ferry Line in 1959, and they have owned it ever since. Mann's Store. Mann's Store was built in 1903. It was originally a 2-story building, but then it had a fire in 1932. The original owners were George O'Mann and his brother Edward. At first, all the items were on tables, then they built shelves, and then eventually got metal shelves. They rebuilt everything to be on 1 story and added on an unloading dock. Mann's Store has been a family-owned business since 1903.
The Hotel Washington. The Hotel Washington was built in 1904 by Ben Johnson, who is the original owner. It was built as a hotel for skipper captains who were coming into the harbor. They have 8 rooms currently, although they used to have more. 2 cottages were built with the hotel, along with the first sidewalk on the island. Ben did all he could to provide a home away from home. It is now owned by Jeannie Cokes.
Trinity Church. Trinity Church was first built in 1930 with the help of John Christensen, who was the first minister of the church. Christensen was a minister until 1933. On January 12, 1947, at 8:40 a.m., Trinity burned to the ground in 45 minutes. All that remained of it was the basement walls. Members of the church and community knew they wanted it rebuilt as soon as possible, so it was officially done in 1950.
The Peterson Barn. The Peterson Barn was built in the late 1980s, or 1800s. The barn was used for animals and storing carriages. The photo shown here was taken in the 1980s. The barn did not have electricity or running water. Over time, the barn structure started to weaken, so the supports were added. The Peterson Barn is one of the oldest barns on the island.
The North Shore Cottages. The North Shore Cottages, or also called Dutch cottages, were built in the 1800s. One cottage was built out of wood and used as a building for farm animals such as horses. In that first photo there are large sliding doors, most likely built for those farm animals. The other cottage was built into the ground and made out of stones. This building was used for storing ice and possibly fish that they caught throughout the year.
The Fisherman's Cottage. The Fisherman's Cottage was built in 1917 by John Christensen. The house was originally built for his elderly parents, but he later moved in after they passed in the early 1920s. Soon after Christensen married Mary Anderson, who was widowed with 5 sons, Christensen earned a living by working on lake freighters and also had a commercial fishing business that his sons helped with once they were older. John Christensen was not only known for his commercial fishing business, but also for being the first minister of the newly built Lutheran Church.
The 7th and 8th grade graders focused on the economic development of the island. By taking the opportunity to visit with local experts on the topic, students were able to gain a better understanding of the overall development of the island's economy throughout the years. Students created a video to showcase their learning.
Well, actually, a growing economy is critical for economic development, if I say so myself.
There are so many different types of businesses on the island.
Well, let's go talk to some experts and see what they have to say.
Roll the clip!
I interviewed Dick Purington on the evolution of transportation from the island to the Washington Island. Mr. Purington told me about the early days of transportation of cars going to and from the island. Did you know that in 1960 the Voyager was the first ferry bought by the Washington Ferry Line to be able to haul several semis? With several semis coming across to the island, more businesses would get loads of food or goods more efficiently. This was a positive impact on the island because with more goods to sell, the businesses can make more money. Mr. Purington explained the origin of the ferry line and how they could have adapted over the years to meet the economic demands of the island and how he feels they will continue to grow in the future.
I would say that a well-run ferry service, which is dependable, safe, year-round, helps to stabilize an island economy. And when people know they can count on getting back and forth at what I would hope would be viewed as a reasonable rate. Not everybody might agree with that, but you have to pay for the expenses that you have, docks, dredging, boat maintenance, labor, etc. So if it's a well-run ferry operation, that should mean something to the people who own land on the island, who are thinking of building a summer home on the island. And I think all of that kind of goes together so that it becomes a more appealing place for people to visit, and it gives them the confidence that if they need to get away in the middle of February, they can do that. A lot of people, have no idea that our ferries operate in ice in the wintertime. So,
when meeting with Jerry Mann about Mann's store, he stated that tourism has a big impact of the economic development of the island and the grocery store. Back in the day, they sold to mostly farmers and fishermen. Now tourism has largely taken over those sectors. Groceries were also attained differently. Originally, they purchased all their cattle locally. They stored the hides until they could sell them. Shipments have also evolved throughout the years.
Well, way back when, back in the, say, 60s and 70s, it was the American Girl, a boat that loaded stuff from Green Bay and came up here twice a week. We'd meet them at the dock and have to haul everything up here. When the ferry line made the first flat top boat, the Voyager, then we were able to get a semi in here. And then that kind of changed things and the amount of stuff we could buy and and how we could get it here.
Fishing has had an impact on the local economy for countless years. I interviewed Kenny Coyne regarding his 53 years of fishing experience to hear his stories. Mr. Coyne described how improved manufacturing has changed throughout the years. One example of this is how the fishing nets are made. By using plastic and nylon materials, they no longer require constant upkeep and care to prevent molding and rotting. For Mr. Coyne, the family tradition of fishing is most important to him.
Well, that's how I got started. 53 years ago. I was working as a stonemason, and I come home and my dad says, "You want to go fishing?" I said, "Well, sure," and I headed for the fishing poles. And he says, "No, not that kind." I'm like, "Well, what kind?" He says, "There's a fish tug for sale in Jackson Harbor." I said, "Oh." Then I said, "Can I do it?" I'd never been on one, looked just like you guys. He says, "Hold out your hand." Held out my hand. They're big enough. That's 53 years ago.
Wow.
And the first day I thought, and I'm going to do this for how long? You know, I thought I'd last a week maybe, but hung in there. Yeah. Come this coming weekend, it'll be 53 years. And I will go back, I remember exactly where I was, and lift nets the same spot.
Tourism has impacted the growth of hospitality on the island. I interviewed Kathy Finley, who explained how the Holiday Inn was used back when it was newly built. She said that it used to serve as a boarding house for fishermen. She noted that beginning in the early 1900s, tourists started coming to the island. That was when the inn started taking in tourists as a hotel, serving breakfast and dinner meals.
It opened in 1895 as a boarding house, the old inn, which doesn't exist anymore. And it basically took care of people who came to the island, fishing. Some workers who came to the island during like the potato season and things like that, but it wasn't really a tourist place right away. It was a boarding house for mostly men who came to work. And then I think it probably around 1900 began taking in tourists. People wanted their families to come. And so then they would all come and stay at the inn and eat down in the dining room, just family style, just like you'd eat with your own family.
While talking to Paula McDonald regarding the economic impact of the parks, she stated that the parks are a key reason that the island is able to be a tourist destination. People travel to see the beauty of the parks on the water. She explained the origin of many of our local parks and how some were originally purchased by individuals or small group in order to give back to the community. One example of this is Red Barn.
It was purchased by the people. It wasn't through the town government. It was a group of people that believed we needed a community center. The community center wasn't there, and we needed a bigger space to have like town board meetings or like performances and recreation for youth. And so in 1946 they agreed to purchase the property, but it took many, many, many years to pay off that debt, and I can't remember exactly how much it cost, but anyway, they did all kinds of fundraisers, like, if somebody had excess apples, like when they grew apples and cherries here, maybe they would sell some apples. Well, one of the things we did was we danced in the fest 2 times a week. There was a fest for the tourists.
Electricity use has changed drastically over the years. I interviewed Robert Cornell from the Washington Island Electric Co-op about the difference in electricity use from the late 1900s to today. He gave us a tour of the building and told us some of the history of the generators. While Robert doesn't believe there is a direct connection between tourism and electricity use, the growing population and expansive electricity requirements do have a direct connection to the growth of the power needs from the co-op. What is the difference in electricity use today compared to 20 or 30 years ago?
Significantly higher. To give you a number, I would be pretty difficult to do that without going back and taking a look. But the first generator that was on the island was 100 kW, and our average daily load now is 1,500 kW. So going back to 1945, that little plant covered all the needs. Not everybody was connected to it, but covered all the needs that we had, and now it's about 1,500, but our peaks are about 2,400 kW.
I didn't know there was so much to learn about economic development. I know, and there's so much more information we got from the interviews that we couldn't put in the video. But wait, if you want to watch the full interview, go check our YouTube channel out. Students, what are you doing here? Oh no! What?
The 11th and 12th grade students focused their research on the historical evaluation of Washington Island and its cultural heritage. Students utilized the archives and community interviews to gain insight into the island's past and present. Their research focused on three main topics: Washington Harbor, Death's Door, and the cultural significance of island baseball.
How Death's Door shaped Washington Island's cultural identity. Some questions to consider during this presentation would be, how did Death's Door get its name? Where is Death's Door, and what is Port de Mort? The picture on the top left is the Death's Door passage that is used today with the Washington Island Ferry. There are several stories that highlight legends and how Death's Door was named. Some include Indian battles, French explorers, and water curses. The first documentation of Death's Door. In Death's Door, In Pursuit of a Legend by Conan Bryan Eaton, claims that the earliest recorded account of the name Death's Door comes in the year 1728 from a journal entry of the French Jesuit missionary Emmanuel Crepsel. On August 14th, he mentions passing through Death's Door, stating, "As we were doubling Cap La Morte, Death's Door, which is about 5 leagues across, we encountered a gust of wind, which drove ashore several canoes that were unable to double a point in order to obtain shelter. They were broken by the shock and were obliged to distribute among the other canoes the men who by the greatest good fortune in the world had all escaped from the danger. Today there are over 240 known shipwrecks in the waters of Door County. There were 64 shipwrecks that occurred in Death's Door between the years 1837 and 1914. In the 1800s, to prevent further shipwrecks from happening, Sturgeon Bay built a shipping canal so ships no longer had to cross the dangerous strait for trading. Although the shipping canal was very useful, people had still used Death's Door to avoid paying tolls and tug fees to use the canal. The shipwrecks and continued shipping traffic caused the need for lighthouses. Rock Island, Pilot Island, Plum Island, and Sturgeon Bay all built lighthouses to aid in the ship's safety. All goods and products were sent by boats, and the cargo industry was increasing. The dangers of crossing Death's Door only deterred some, but it was important to keep the trade going. Some concluded that the French made up a frightful legend and named it Port de Mort as an attempt to discourage English exploration. In the late 1800s, Washington Island used to be known for its agriculture and fishing industry. The growing and exportation of cherries, potatoes, apples, and maple syrup kept the island going. Present-day Washington Island thrives off the tourism industry, Death's Door being one of the many locations that draw people here. Washington Island's cultural identity has been greatly influenced by Death's Door. The construction of the ferryboats were designed based on the conditions of Death's Door. According to ferryboat captain Joel Gumlickson, the structural identity of the ferries were made to withstand the crashing waves and thick ice year-round. Depending on the conditions of the water, Joel will have to drive the ferry to a certain way throughout the islands. Along with the ferries, the island's tourism is influenced by Death's Door. Every time someone comes to the island, they cross Death's Door, making the adventure that more thrilling and giving business products to sell. The answers to your questions at the beginning of the slideshow. Death's Door got its name from several shipwrecks and deaths that had taken place there. Porte Mort is French for the door of death.
Baseball on the Island by Rita Valentinsik
and Fisher Grandy, Bennett Isaacson Kruger,
Thomas Pratt,
and Jackson Lindgren.
Beginnings of island baseball. For the first 2 decades of the 1900s, baseball was played on multiple different ball diamonds all across the island. The baseball team found their permanent home in the early 1920s and eventually bought the field from Arnold Klingenberg in 1957 for $500, according to an article in The Observer written by Matt Foss. The article showed on the screen talks about a game taking place on July 4th, 1875 against boys from St. Martin's Island. Joining the Door County League. In 1928, the island considered joining the Dorkeewani League, but when a team from Two Rivers joined, they decided against it. This was because they would have missed too much work traveling to Two Rivers, since most of the players were fishermen. In 1935, the Islanders joined the Northern Door County League.
Finding competition. The team began by playing independently by finding competition from all over. Notable teams that the Islanders took on were the Piney Woods team and the Civilian Conservation Corps. The Piney Woods team played on the island 3 different times in the 1930s, traveling all the way from Mississippi. The team was made from African-American teenagers that performed by song across the Midwest to raise money for their school. In the 1930s, the Islanders played the most diversified group of opponents in the team's history. The concession stand evolution. While the concession stand's first date is unclear, the first electrical bill paid in for the concession stand was in 1973. Several Islanders agreed on the late 60s, so this clarifies that there wasn't electricity for a few years. According to a post, Dave Bjornson wired the first concession stand up. On September 16th of 2020, several Islanders noticed that Tom Jordan with his excavating equipment at the Islanders field. This was the beginning of the long-awaited concession stand. The concession stand is important because it supports the team, it serves traditional hot dogs and brats, and gives kids something to snack on.
1045 Main Road. Log cabin built by Leola and Henry Hagen was a restaurant that served as a concession stand on Sundays. They would serve sodas and beer during the game, and if you wanted ice cream, you would have to go inside. Islanders Little League. The Washington Island Little League team was first established in 1959 by Reverend Myron Helene, Everett Ellison, and Ray Hansen. The team wasn't yet in a league yet, however, they did have a few games off in the county. A story most of them remember is getting caught in a storm playing Sister Bay, which led to them staying the night at Jack Bunda's boathouse. Most of these Little Leaguers ended up becoming Islanders and contributed into making everyone's Sunday a great day. And then here are pictures of Little League teams over the years.
History of Islanders baseball land. The baseball fields are also used for other activities. The ice skating rink was set up by the fire department after being donated by the Lions Club. In the winter, it is set up on the Little League field. Softball pickup during the summer. Softball pickup is also at the Little League field, and it is an enjoyable experience because we can play at night thanks to the lights. Those are some owners of the Island Baseball Park land from 1900. And on the bottom right, or bottom left, I guess, there's a picture of the baseball field over time. 4th of July celebration at the ball field.
The first recorded celebration in the island archives was in 1941 in a Door County Advocate article on July 4th. There was a parade at night, and at night there was fireworks at the ball field. The 4th would also host baseball games that day to provide a whole day of celebration.
How is Islanders baseball important to cultural identity of our island? Pam Goodlett said, always went to the games since her dad was a catcher. Carla Gullickson said she has yelled screen ball since 1970 when Julian Hagen told her what it meant. I think it allows new people to be a part of our community and enjoy our Sundays. And then Matt Foss said, it's so ingrained in island culture, it's hard to imagine a time without baseball. Joey Cornell said, baseball runs deep. Old-timers live and breathe for it. And then Bennett Isaacson says, baseball brings our community together.
Here's some more pictures of baseball. This is memorabilia located at Nelson's Hall. If you're interested, you can go check it out. It's pretty cool. And then here are just more pictures of baseball and the Islanders across the years. We actually had red jerseys before we had green ones, and we were called the Reds, which is really interesting because green is now our signature color. Thank you.
In the era before Wisconsin achieved statehood, a gentleman resided on the east side of Washington Harbor, where he taught children without the aid of textbooks or papers. His dock served as the classroom. This marked the earliest form of structured education before the 1850s on Washington Island.
Subsequently, in 1850, a log school building was erected to the beach, but it posed risk to the students during the winter as they played on the ice during recess. Responding to parental concerns, a frame building, now known as St. Michael's Chapel, was erected further from the beach in 1869. This notable structure is visible from the road across from the cemetery entrance.
Parents were still critical about the location, as kids still played on the ice despite the distance. So eventually, the district established a new school in 1904, now known as the Art and Nature Center. Initially a grade school, it later merged with Detroit Harbor School, transforming into a high school. By 1945, all schools had consolidated into the Detroit Harbor School, as all people had cars and could travel further to one school because there were fewer kids.
During our historical exploration of Washington Harbor, we visited the local cemetery and pondered why it was in this location. Our visit to the island archives provided the answers we were seeking. Archivist Steve Rice guided us on uncovering the truth behind the cemetery's placement in the heart of Washington Harbor. In 1852, Peter McBride generously donated his acres to establish the cemetery. The sandy soil surrounding the cemetery made excavation much easier, which likely played a role in the decision. However, our research revealed that additional factors influenced the cemetery's location. In the 1900s, when the island civilization began to take shape, Washington Harbor was the focal point. Population density in this area surpassed that of any other on the island, with houses, churches, and other structures dotting the harbor's perimeter. Traditionally, cemeteries were positioned near churches, further explaining the placement of the cemetery. Taking all this into consideration, we can confidently attribute the cemetery's location to the presence of churches and the sandy soil.
In November of 1913, the Louisiana was anchored inside Washington Harbor, but because of the severe storm and high winds from the north, the boat's anchor snapped or lost its hold, and the storm dragged it further inland. Washington Harbor is a dangerous port to shelter in because it is open to strong fall storms from the north. The Great Storm of 1913 was a grave message that the unprotected fort was unsafe from the worst of storms. But because the strong storms, the boats and the docks and harbor were well weathered. Another reason Washington Harbor is a dangerous port is that the ice floes could drag away docks or damage them in the winters. But Detroit Harbor, while ice over, was much more protected. These two factors spurred the slow shift to the port of Detroit Harbor.
Historically, Detroit Harbor was a shallow and treacherous bay. For a long time, no commercial boats could view the area of the port, but in the early 1900s, dredging occurred on both sides of Detroit Harbor. This allowed Detroit Harbor to become the new main port for everything because it provided more shelter than Washington Harbor could provide and could fit ships with larger drafts. Detroit Harbor was protected from all sides with the help of Detroit Island itself and the peninsulas around it. The ice couldn't shift and tear away as severely as it did in Washington Harbor. With the rise of car usage on the island, the idea of a main port became a more viable option to distribute goods around the island. Since Washington Harbor is a greater distance from the mainland, it made it harder and it took longer for cars to get there. Detroit Harbor is much closer to the mainland, making it a much easier access point. Eventually, the creation of the ferry boats changed the dispersion of goods. Overall, this removed the prevalence of the other harbors and created an easier way for car travel to and from the island.
The first raft was launched in the 1950s. It was a flat raft. After that one fell apart, a different raft was used. When it became clear that the design was not effective, the town decided to build a raft, similar to the one we have today. However, the kids could not resist tipping it over. It was only used for about a year or two. That brings us to the current raft, which was donated by Jill and Orion Mann in memory of their son, Jason Mann, in 2008. This is the raft we still use today.
As we come to the close of this wonderful journey through the history of Washington Island, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here today. Generations of hardworking, resilient, passionate people have shaped our island. Washington Island's history is a testament of the strength of the community and the enduring connection between people and place. As we look back on these stories, remember that we are all part of this ongoing history. The legacy of Washington Island continues through each of us. Whether we are preserving traditions, sharing stories, or simply appreciating the beauty and uniqueness of this place we call home. Before we part ways, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone who made today's event possible. Without those who helped us in research, from the archives to the countless community members who took time out of their busy schedules to meet with us. Your participation helps the spirit of Washington Island stay alive for future generations. We are incredibly grateful. At this point, we would like to call Julian Hagen back to the stage. Now, a little birdie made us aware that it's your birthday today. Happy birthday, Julian. If everyone could please join us in singing happy birthday while our K4 students join us back on stage for our final presentation of the day. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Julian. Happy birthday to you. To close out the show, we'll be singing the song The Northern Lights by Julian Hagen. About 30 years ago, Julian wrote a song that has become an island favorite, possibly because it seems to capture the feeling of that special peace and quiet found on the island when looking up at the clear night sky full of stars on a cool night, often in fall, and streaks of color dance across the sky. A feeling of gratitude seems to fill you up, not only as you think about standing in awe of the gift of nature's colorful surprise dancing in the sky, but gratitude for that moment in life you've been given, surrounded by friends in such a beautiful place. Julian and our elementary school students will now lead us in the song. The words are printed on the back of your program. Please sing along and feel free to stand up, join arms, and sway to the music. Thank you. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
That's okay. That's okay. We're just gonna sing. Sing loud, okay? Laughing and dancing, yet tears in my eyes. I've watched the northern lights dance in the sky to a simple freedom song. Twisting and turning, yet come all around. They've made my feet never touch on the ground. Yes, they've made me dance. Come on, gang. Because we'll never have this time to live again. So why not live it up while we can? Or there's less time than before, and I don't know how much more. But I know we'll never have this time again. The fresh smell of wood smoke invading my mind makes me remember all the good times that I spent with my friends, talking and dreaming of what we could be. If we could just find our life's simple key to make it never end. Come on. Because we'll never have this time to live again. What now? So why not live it up while we can? Or there's less time than before, and I don't know how much more, but I know we'll never have this time again. One more time, you guys, the whole chorus. Because we'll never have this time to live again. So why not live it up while we can?